Ninth principle. As with the matters which Denizli court's just prosecutor included in the indictment because of the unfair and superficial records of other places, so with Afyon courts, as indicated by what we experienced while being questioned, pretexts have been made so that we have been charged concerning the same matters, and undated letters, and correspondence over 20, 15, and 10 years, and the fifth ray, decisive answers about which are found in the third principle above, and in the second question of my petition above, and 4 or 5 treatises out of the 130 of the Risale-i Nur, and a number of letters and treatises which were scrutinized by Eskişehir court, and 4 which the sentences were served, were later covered by the pardon and were acquitted by Denizli court. Can it be said about someone who with a speech outside the war ministry during the 31st of March incident brought to order 8 battalions which had not heeded the Shaykh al-Islam and ulama that he strove for 8 years, as stated by the police report, and only succeeded in deceiving 20 or 30 people? For instance, in the large town of Kastamonu, he was able to hoodwink only 5 people. For during the Denizli affair in Kastamonu, they pulled out all my papers and books, both confidential and otherwise, from under the firewood, and after studying them for 3 months, could find no one in that large town other than Feyzi, Emin, Hilmi, Tevfik, and Sadık. Because Feyzi and the others had performed some personal services for me, for God's sake, they sent them to prison together with the 3 brothers, and 3 or 4 others they found in Emirdağ who had assisted me for 3.5 years. If I had done what that superficial reports stated, I would have deceived not 5 or 10 people, but 500 or perhaps 5,000 or even 500,000. As in Denizli court, I pointed out the many errors in the police reports, so too here I am pointing out 1 or 2 examples. They accused us of corrupting religion because, following an Islamic custom practiced since the age of the Prophet, I had compiled a Hizb al-Qur'ani, like a large An'am, out of the hundreds of well-known verses which form the sources of the Risale-i Nur. Also, they want to incriminate us by showing that the treatise on Islamic dress, Tesettür Risalesi, was written and published this year, whereas I have already served a year's sentence for it, and I treated it as confidential, and as noted in the police report, it was pulled out from under piles of firewood. Also, although the well-known person did not respond and was silent in the face of the objections and harsh words, I said to him in the speaker's office in the assembly in Ankara, with gross exaggeration, the prosecution applied to him literally the natural, necessary, general, and confidential criticisms in my explanations of 40 years previously concerning a hadith which describes his errors after his death, making it into an indictable offense for us. Can there be any comparison between the sake or memory of someone who is dead and gone and who no longer has any connection with the government and Almighty God's laws of justice, which are a manifestation of His sovereignty? Also, freedom of conscience, which, of the principles adopted by the governments of the Republic, is the one we have most relied on and defended ourselves with, has been made something we have transgressed against, as though we are opposed to it. Also, because I criticize the evils and faults of civilization, unimaginable things are ascribed to me in the police reports, as though I do not accept the use of the radio, aeroplane, and railway. They accuse me of being opposed to modern progress. Note: I said that in order to offer supreme thanks for a supreme divine bounty like the radio, it should recite the Qur'an so that all the people on the face of the earth could listen to it, and the atmosphere might become a hafiz of the Qur'an. Making a comparison with these examples, God willing, like the just and fair Denizli public prosecutor, Afyon court will show how contrary to justice this treatment is, and will attach no importance to the deletions in those police reports. The strangest error is this. In one place I said, although mankind should have responded with endless thanks to Almighty God's supreme bounties of the aeroplane, railway, and radio, they did not, so He rained down bombs on their heads from the planes. The radio is also a supreme bounty, and thanks for it may be shown by making it a universal reciter of the Qur'an with millions of tongues, allowing all the people on the face of the earth to listen to it. Also, I said when explaining in the 20th word that the Qur'an makes predictions about the future wonders of civilization, that one of its verses indicates that the infidels will defeat the Islamic world with the railway. Although I had urged Islam to lay hold of these wonders, some of the prosecutors in previous courts accused us of being against modern progress and made the aeroplane, railway, and radio the basis of charges against us. Also, although it is completely unrelated, someone said about the name Risale-i Nur, which is a second name of the Risale-i Nur, that it is a message, Risalet, from the light of the Qur'an, that is, it is inspired by it and is an heir performing the function of divine messengership of the Sharia. In another place in the indictment, it was given the wrong meaning and made the basis of other charges, as though I had said, the Risale-i Nur is a divine messenger. I have also proved with decisive arguments in 20 places in my defense speeches that even if it were for the whole world, we would not exploit either religion or the Qur'an or the Risale-i Nur, and they may not be exploited, and that we would not change one of their truths for rule over the whole world, and that is how we are in fact. There have been thousands of indications of what I claim over the last 20 years. But from the way the interrogations at Afyon are going and its indictments, we are being accused due to other police reports of expending all our efforts on worldly intrigues and hastening to the hateful games of this world and making religion the tool of lawless things and degrading its sacredness and making this our aim. Since it is thus, with all my strength, I say, for us God suffices and He is the best disposer of affairs. Said Nursi. In His name be He glorified. An addendum to my written objections to the charges made against us by Afyon court. Those I address in this objection are not the Afyon prosecutor and court, but the spiteful and suspicious officials who, due to the false and defective reports of public prosecutors in other places and informers and detectives, have turned against us the extraordinary situation here and in the office of the examining magistrate. Firstly, just how far from justice it is to call the Risale-i Nur students who are innocent and have no connection with politics, a political society which is completely baseless and never even occurred to us, and to accuse the unfortunates who embrace the Risale-i Nur and have no aim other than belief in the hereafter of publishing works for that society, or being active officers or members of it, or of reading the Risale-i Nur or teaching it to others, or of writing it out, thus deeming them guilty of some crime, and to send them to court. A proof of how far this is from justice is as follows. In accordance with the principles of freedom of thought and freedom of scholarship, those who read the harmful works written to oppose the Qur'an by Dr. Dazi and other atheists are not considered to have committed crimes, yet those who have great need to learn the truths of the Qur'an and believe and long to do so and read and write out the Risale-i Nur, which teaches those truths as clearly as daylight, are considered guilty of crimes. Also, they based their allegations on a few sentences in 1 or 2 treatises, which we had treated as confidential before they were exhibited in court, so that among 100 other treatises, a wrong meaning should not be given them, and accusations were made concerning them. However, with the exception of one of those treatises, Eskişehir court scrutinized them and objected to only 1 or 2 matters in the treatise on Islamic dress, and the exception is replied to extremely decisively in both my petition and my objections to the indictment, and the fact that we have light in our hands, not the club of politics, was proved conclusively from 20 angles in Eskişehir court, and Denizli court scrutinized all the treatises of the Risale-i Nur without exception and did not object to any of them. Nevertheless, those unfair persecutors extended those 3 or 4 sentences to the whole Risale-i Nur, and just as they confiscated the 400-page Zülfikar because of 2 pages, so they stated those who read and write out the Risale-i Nur were guilty of a crime and accused myself of contesting the government. I call on those close to me and the friends who meet with me to testify that for more than 10 years, apart from 2 leaders, 1 deputy, and the governor of Kastamonu, I have not known who the leaders of the government were, or who its ministers, commanders, officials, and deputies were, and I have evinced no curiosity to find out. However, 1 or 2 years ago, 1 or 2 persons displayed an interest in me, and I learned of 5 or 6 of the leading members of the government. Is it in any way possible for someone not to know the people he is contesting, and to have no wish to know them, to attach no importance to learning whether they are friend or foe? It is understood from this that they dream up totally baseless pretexts to ruin me whatever happens. Since that is the case, I say not to the court here, but to those unjust people, I don't give tuppence for your severest penalty. It has no importance whatsoever. For I am 75 years old and have 1 foot in the grave. To exchange 1 or 2 years of innocent life of persecution for the rank of martyrdom would be the greatest happiness for me. Thanks to the thousands of proofs of the Risale-i Nur, I believe with the utmost certainty that for us death is our discharge papers. Even if outwardly it is execution, for us 1 hour's distress would be the key to eternal happiness and mercy. But as for you, cowards, cruel enemies who confuse the judiciary on account of atheism and preoccupy the government with us for no reason, be certain of this and tremble, for you are being condemned to eternal annihilation and everlasting solitary confinement. We see that our revenge is being taken on you in compounded fashion. We pity you even. Yes, surely the reality of death, which has emptied this town 100 times into the graveyard, has demands greater than life. To find a way of being delivered from its certain execution is man's greatest need, more important than anything. Those who on trials pretexts impute guilt to the Risale-i Nur students who have found this way for themselves, and to the Risale-i Nur, which provides that way with thousands of proofs, how guilty they are themselves in the eyes of truth and justice, even lunatics would understand. There are 3 matters which deceive these unjust people and give rise to the delusion of a political society which is completely irrelevant. The first, the fact that since early days my students have been fervently attached to me like brothers has given rise to the erroneous impression of a society. The second, some of the Risale-i Nur students have acted as though they were an Islamic group, such as is found everywhere and is permitted by the laws of the Republic and is not harassed by it, and this has been imagined to be a society. But those limited 3 or 4 students have not intended any sort of political society, only to serve belief together sincerely as brothers and to support each other in working for the hereafter. The third, because those unfair people know themselves to be misguided and overcome by love of this world, and because they found some of the government's laws convenient for themselves, they say to themselves, most probably Said and his friends oppose the government's laws, which suit our caprices, which are illicit in the eyes of civilization. In which case, they are a political society which opposes the government. So I say, you wretches, if the world were eternal and man was going to remain in it permanently and his only duty was politics, perhaps there would be some meaning in your slander. But if I had undertaken this work with a view to politics, you would have found not 10 sentences in 100 treatises, but 1,000 to be political and combative. If to suppose the impossible, like you, we had been working with all our strength for worldly aims and pleasures and politics, which not even a Satan could make anyone accept, even if it had been thus, since these 20 years, there has been no incident in which we were involved, and the government looks not to the heart, but to the hand, and all governments have fierce opponents. You cannot deem us guilty in the name of the law. My last word is, God suffices me. There is no God but He. In Him do I place my trust. He, the sustainer of the throne of glory supreme. After our acquittal in Denizli court, I lived alone and did not concern myself with politics. This new affair, which has resulted in our being sent to Afyon prison, is therefore unlawful in 10 ways, as I shall explain. The first, although the Risale-i Nur has been scrutinized by 3 courts and 3 committees of experts and 7 departments of government in Ankara and their legal bodies, and although all the treatises were unanimously acquitted without opposition, and Said and his 75 companions were all acquitted without being sentenced to a single day's imprisonment, to again seize those treatises as though they were pernicious writings is totally contrary to the law, as anyone the slightest bit reasonable would understand. The second, a man who lived for 3.5 years all alone and a stranger in Emirdağ after having been acquitted with his door locked from the outside and bolted on the inside, who accepted only 1 out of 100 people on essential business and even gave up the work of writing he had pursued for 20 years and wrote no more. He had the lock on his door smashed by detectives for political purposes, and they broke in on him, but they could find nothing other than an Arabic prayer book and a wall hanging. Anyone with even a grain of fairness would understand how illegal it was to harass him in this way. The third, as he said in court, if there is someone who, as is confirmed by 70 witnesses, for 7 years knew nothing of the Second World War and was not curious about it, nor asked about it, and now for 10 years has been in the same state of mind, and for 25 years has read no newspaper nor listened to one, and for 30 years has said, I seek refuge with God from a Satan and politics, and has avoided politics with all his strength, and if in 22 years of the most torturous distress, in order not to attract the attention of politicians or become involved in politics, has not once applied to the government to alleviate his conditions, if there is such a person, is it in conformity with any law to rate his place of seclusion as though he were plotting political intrigues and cause him unheard of suffering while he was ill? Anyone with an iota of conscience would pity him in that state. The fourth, as Chair Court studied the Risale-i Nur for 6 months because we had been charged with organizing a political society and founding a Sufi order, and due to that suspicion, and because of the personal hatred towards us of the great leader, it urged certain members of the judiciary to act against us. Yet, that court acquitted us of founding a political society and Sufi order and the Risale-i Nur charges, and only making a pretext of a short piece called Treatise on Islamic Dress, gave sentences of 6 months to 15 out of 100 students, not in accordance with the law, but arbitrarily. And although, until the investigations had been completed, they remained in prison for 4.5 months, that is, they served prison sentences of 1.5 months, and 10 years later Denizli court, again on a number of pretexts, like organizing a political society and founding a Sufi order, And after scrutinizing closely 20 years' worth of letters and writings, sent 5 boxes of books to Ankara Criminal Court, and although those books and letters were the subject of 2 years' close scrutiny by Ankara and Denizli courts, they passed a unanimous decision for their acquittal concerning the political society and Sufi order and other pretexts, and returned all the books to their owners. Note: the basis and aim of the Risale-i Nur is certain affirmative belief and the essential reality of the Qur'an. For this reason, 3 courts of law have acquitted it in regard to being a tariqat, Sufi order. Furthermore, no person has said during these 20 years, Sa'id has given me tariqat instruction. Also, a way to which for 1,000 years most of these nations' forefathers have been bound may not made something for which the members of the nation are answerable. Also, those who combat successfully those coward dissemblers who attach the name of tariqat to the reality of Islam and attack this nation's religion may not themselves be accused of being a tariqat. As for a society or community, it is a fraternity which look to the hereafter within Islamic brotherhood. It is not a political society, as 3 courts have ruled. They have acquitted it in that respect. They also acquitted Said and his companions. So, anyone who has not lost his humanity will understand just how illegal it is to look on him as a political activist and accuse him of being a plotter and to provoke the officers of the court against him. The 5th, because of the compassion which is the basis of my way and that of the Risale-i Nur, and for 30 years has been a principle by which I have lived, I do not censure the tyrants who persecute me so that no harm comes to the innocent, let alone cursing them. Even when angry at some of those depraved wretches who oppress me out of vicious hatred, or even the irreligious tyrants, my compassion prevents me from responding with a curse, let alone physically. For those cruel tyrants have parents and children. I do nothing to them so that no material harm comes to those 4 or 5 elderly unfortunates and innocents. Sometimes I even forgive them. It is because of this compassion that I absolutely never interfere in governments or disturb public order. Moreover, I have recommended this so strongly to all my friends that some of the fair-minded police of 3 provinces have admitted that these Risale-i Nur students are police of a sort. They preserve order and maintain public security. There are thousands of witnesses to this fact, and they have confirmed it through 20 years' experience, and thousands of students have corroborated it by never having been involved in any incident recorded by the police. So, which law permits that unhappy man's house to be raided as though he were a revolutionary and comitaji, and for pitiless men to insult him, and despite not finding anything in his house, as though he were a multiple criminal, gather up his most precious, miraculous Qur'an and the inscriptions hanging on his wall, as though they were pernicious writings. What benefit demands turning thousands of religious people who thus serve public order with their good morals against government and public order because of some baseless suspicion? The 6th, endless thanks be to God that 30 years ago, through His grace and the effulgence of the Qur'an, a person realized just how valueless and meaningless are the fleeting fame and glory of this world, and its egotistical self-admiration and celebrity, and since that time has struggled with all his strength against his evil commanding soul, and to be self-effacing and give up egotism, and not to be artificial and hypocritical. Those who have served him or befriended him are perfectly certain of this and testify to it. For 20 years he has fled with all his might from people's good opinions and their attention, which everyone takes too much pleasure in, and contrary to everyone else has rejected praise and acclaim and being accorded a spiritual rank. He has also rejected the excessively good opinions of him of his closest brothers, and has wounded their feelings by not accepting the praise and commendation expressed in their letters. He has shown himself to be devoid of virtue and has ascribed all virtue to the Risale-i Nur, a Qur'anic commentary, and hence to the collective personality of the Risale-i Nur students, thinking of himself as only a lowly servant. This proves that he has not tried to make himself liked, and he has not wanted to, and has rejected it. So, under what law has he been deemed guilty? Because without his consent, some of his friends in a distant place had an excessively good opinion of him and eulogized him and awarded him a high spiritual rank, and because of what a preacher said in the region of Kütahya, whom he does not know, and because of a letter with a forged signature which had been sent to Kütahya, where I have never sent any letter, and because of an offensive book in Balıkesir, the author of which is unknown, would any law in the world permit sending officials to break the lock of a wretched, aged, ill stranger's room as though he had committed a serious crime, and allow them to justify this by finding only a book of supplications and a wall hanging? Would any politics allow such aggression? The seventh, would any law permit for an unfortunate who, although at this time inside the country when there are so many lively political parties and currents, internal and external, and the ground is ripe to take advantage of this, that is, to win numerous diplomats and politicians as supporters in place of his handful of friends, told all his friends solely in order not to get involved in politics, nor damage his sincerity, nor attract the government's attention to himself, nor to become preoccupied with the world. Beware, don't get carried away by those political currents. Don't get involved in politics. Don't disturb public order. And although two currents caused him harm and distress because he withdrew in this way, the old one because of its groundless fears, and the new because it says he does not help it, despite all this he never interfered in the worldly's world, and was busy with his life of the hereafter, and wrote not even one letter in 22 years to his own brother in the village of Nurs, in his native region, nor 10 letters in 20 years to his friends in those provinces. So, which law permits that anyone interferes to this extent with his preoccupation with the hereafter? Would any law permit collecting up copies of the Risale-i Nur in which 3 courts of law have found nothing indictable, although under the liberty laws the publications of those without religion and the communists are not interfered with despite being extremely harmful for the country and nation and morality? For the Risale-i Nur has been striving for 20 years to maintain the country and nation's social life and morality and security, and has been effectively struggling to regain for this nation its true support, the Islamic world's brotherhood and its friendship, and to strengthen this and the parts of the Risale-i Nur like Zulfikar and the staff of Moses, Asai Musa, which having been studied for 3 months by the Directorate of Religious Affairs on the orders of the Minister for Internal Affairs for the purpose of having it criticized, fully appreciated its value and had it put in the department library as an important work, and the staff of Moses, which was placed on the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be blessings and peace, as a sign of its acceptance, was seen thereby the Hajjis. Would any law, conscience, or justice permit these to be collected up as though they were injurious papers and sent to court